a.m. in the morning for eyeballs, and agenda
Really?
attention is something else. And I love it. I thrive in those environments. So it's my kind of vibe. But I can't imagine it's any. I think if any like maybe air traffic controllers are as complicated. Hi everybody, and welcome to a very special edition of Narrative Live. I'm here with Professor Terence Goggin, the West Point professor. You've all seen his incredible Substack, and if you haven't, you have to subscribe to it. He's been on a roll lately. Professor, your work has been incredible. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
We have a really interesting hour ahead. We're going to have a very free-ranging conversation, which I'm excited to have with the professor, all about what's been going on in Venezuela, the military, and also what's happening with ICE, and whether the attempts and even the now appeals court has allowed the National Guard to go into Portland. We'll be discussing what the implications are for all of that. But between January and October this year, ICE increased weapons spending by 700% from $9.7 million to $71.5 million. That's an enormous amount. That's not just more guns. The purchases include chemical weapons. They include items classified as guided missile warheads and explosive components. Um, why does an immigration agency need guided missiles? It's hard to explain. Why do they need hand grenades? Hard to explain. Why do they need any of these things? Why do they have to increase their budget by so much? That's on the one side of the story. On the other side of the story is last week, Admiral Alvin Holsey, the commander of the U.S. Southern Command, stepped down after barely a year in what's typically a 3-year post. CNN sources tell NPR that Halsey met with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to express concerns about the legality of military strikes on alleged drug boats off Venezuela, and then he resigned. Now, tensions had been building for weeks because Southcom, as it's known, was concerned that the operations weren't legal. Senator Jack Reed called it an unexpected resignation and said at a moment when U.S. forces are building up in the Caribbean and tensions with Venezuela are at a boiling point, the departure sends an alarming signal of instability within the chain of command. So here's what connects these two stories together. When asked about the legality of the boat strikes, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery said he'd probably lean more towards they were conducting extremely unusual operations in Southern Command right now that a reasonable person could disagree with the legality of, which is a nice way of saying it was illegal. A four-star admiral walks away because he can't get legal justification for operation. The professional military is drawing red lines clearly about what it's willing to do for Donald Trump and what it isn't willing to do. But Trump still needs forces to execute his agenda, which is why we go back to what's going on with ICE and what's going on with the National Guard. He's federalizing the National Guard units, including sending Texas Guard troops into Illinois against Governor Pritzker's objections. He's following LA and DC. Trump wants to send the National Guard to other US cities too. He says every single US city he intends to have the National Guard in. So, how can he do this? And what does it all mean if you've got red state forces deploying into blue states? Critics warn that ICE was always going to be a private militarized force for Trump to deploy against Americans to implement his agenda. So, we've got the rising tide of militarization in our country from these agencies that could ultimately present sort of and one doesn't want to think about it, but it's sort of a civil war scenario where you've got the red states versus blue states, which is why Terence Goggin is here today, because he's the man who can help distill all these different events for us and help us understand how they fit together and exactly what the military can do in terms of standing up to Donald Trump if he continues to want them to do illegal things. So we'll cover all of that in today's show. But Professor Goggin, you were your post last week or maybe it was this week. I think it was last week. You spoke about how the admiral really resigned because he refused to authorize a ground invasion of Venezuela. Is that correct? That was the assessment that his refusal was not just the killing operation of the sailboats supposedly carrying narcotics, but that he was actually opposing the ground invasion of Venezuela?
Yes. Well, he's actually not talking, so we don't know exactly why he retired early, but we are picking up hints from the various sources we're getting inside the Pentagon. But let's start with the basics. The first thing that happened was that Hegseth presented him with the idea of an invasion. And apparently they did do kind of an advanced analysis, and it came back, and he told the Secretary of Defense, the combatant commander, that based upon our preliminary analysis, it would require a large Iraqi air attack style. It's the style of attack that we use to destroy Saddam Hussein's government, decapitate the air power he had, and his professional armed forces called the Revolutionary Guard. That was called Instant Thunder, Operation Instant Thunder,
I remember that.
which is a very complicated air operation. Took 30 days, took probably half the United States Air Force to implement, including our latest fighter planes, stealth planes, and so forth. But it was a revolutionary operation because it was designed to decapitate not only the government, but the whole entire anti-aircraft operation, which had these nodes of controls in various parts of the country. And they had to destroy each one of those nodes in order to suppress completely the anti-aircraft capability of the country, which was necessary to do any type of infantry attack. Even in Kuwait, you had to get control of the air. If you don't have control of the air, you can't launch an infantry
Right.
attack. That's lesson number one.
Right.
So
Didn't
you would
work
have
out
to
that
do that.
well.
Huh?
Didn't work out that
Pardon?
well in Iraq, did it? So
Well, yes, it did
the
because
instant thunder part might have worked out okay, but yes, the following.
yeah, but instant thunder was to eject the Iraqi army from Kuwait,
Right, right, right. Okay.
and they did do that very successfully. I don't know whether you saw the TV shots of the destroyed
Yeah,
Iraqi
that was that. You're right. I'm
army
confusing the
on the
Iraqi
road.
war with the Kuwaiti invasion.
No,
So,
no, no. The Gulf War is very different from the
yeah,
Iraqi War.
okay.
Okay, that's later. They let a lot of the army go after they won the Gulf War, and then they came back. W said, "Well, it wasn't finished, so I'm going to go finish it," which was a huge mistake. But that's different.
Right.
Okay, but the instant thunder is a specific kind of air attack that is designed very carefully to not go after anything, like not troops, not infrastructure, going after solely the command and control of the anti-aircraft operation that they have. And it's very hard to do, but it's very effective. And you use half your Air Force to do it. So he said that because the Venezuelans have a very similar multi-layered anti-aircraft operation in their country that was built by the Russians, which is very similar to what Iraq had from the Soviets, that it would, but it's more modern. It would require the same kind of intense air attack, which is it would be billions and billions of dollars in cost. We would use a lot of our very sophisticated weaponry, bombs, and so forth. In any
We stop
event,
there a little bit because I think it is interesting that people think that Venezuela would be sort of a
oh,
cakewalk for the U.S. military. But that's not the case at all. I mean, this is a big country with 1 million people in its reserves. I think it's got as you point out, a very sophisticated air defense infrastructure. This is not a country that is going to be
well, yeah,
easily defeated.
they've had years to prepare for this. They've
Mhm,
had allies in there, the Russians, the Chinese, helping
mhm.
them get prepared.
Yeah, so they're not in a very defeatable position necessarily. In fact, the worst case scenario is really a quagmire where we're stuck in the in doing guerrilla war in terrain which is not necessarily friendly to our invasion. Can you hear me? Maybe you can't hear me. You there?
I can't hear you very
Hmm.
well.
That's interesting because my
Yeah,
microphone just died.
I
Um,
could.
Let me try.
Oh, okay.
Oh no! Can you hear me now? No luck.
Yeah, I
Interesting.
can hear you now. I
How
can
about
hear
there?
you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, well, I think I'm on a different. This isn't working, but I think you can still hear me. I guess I was asking you about the Venezuela the worst case scenario of a war in Venezuela would see us bogged down in a quagmire.
Oh yeah, I mean, they are well prepared. They've had years to prepare. They bought all this equipment from the Russians, and actually also from the Chinese, and so they're ready for bear. And the other thing is that they've had a very sophisticated army for years. Venezuela has always had a very large, sophisticated army going back over 100 years. This was the army that was developed by Simon Bolivar in the 19th century to throw the Spanish out of Latin America. It has
Uh,
a tremendously strong military history that they're very proud of. These are very proud officers and men, and they're the inheritors of Simon Bolivar. In fact, the name of the country actually is the Bolivar country of Venezuela. That's the
right,
official title.
right.
So, in any event, they are very tough, well-trained military, and so to take them on, we have to use everything we've got because it's offense, not defense. Defense is much easier and less expensive than offense, and to defeat them, it would take the same kind of effort that we used in the Gulf War, which was a tremendous 30-day air attack.
So you're saying that
20
Halsey was presented a challenge to come up with an operation. He came up with the operation, and then he asked about the legality of that, or he just said it's not feasible. What happened inside to get him to the point where he was, I have to resign, or he was forced to resign.
Well, uh, I don't know the exact nature of his thinking, but I'm going to suppose that what he did is he was asked to prepare a plan, a preliminary operational plan, and he did that. And he came back with what was obviously required, which I just described. And he said, but, and that would be the second step, in order to do that, you need a declaration of war because this is full-blown war. You have an authorization from Congress. And apparently, Hegseth and Trump weren't willing to do that. They felt they had sufficient authority. And he said, no, you don't. You have to go to Congress to get authorized. And so they gave him the choice. And it was kind of simultaneously with the narcotic boat issue, which
Mhm.
was also, but I think the larger question was the invasion of Venezuela, and the boats are really a small tangent of that bigger problem. And
'Cause that's the read of the mainstream media has been that this is about the boats and about these people are committing war crimes because they're destroying these boats in international waters, and that's the reason that the admiral decided he needed to ask for this legal authority. But you're suggesting something much different. You're suggesting that what he resigned over was the invasion of Venezuela, the ground invasion, which the president keeps talking about.
yeah, well, notice that they did shoot people and they did kill people under his watch. So he did order the killings to be done. Uh, he didn't like it and he didn't want to do it. But we're not signatories to the war crimes, the
Right.
Hague and all that. So he wasn't worried about being prosecuted for a war crime. He did think that it was he didn't think the president had legal justification to do that, and the president doesn't. On the other hand, he's the commander in chief, and he's following orders, and it's the president's determination that they are aggressive and they're coming after the United States, such that they are terrorists, and therefore he is authorized to kill them. And so he took that order and he did kill them. Notice that. I mean,
Most of them. He left
I
two alive, and then they
mean,
found out they were Colombians.
he didn't say no to killing the boats,
Mm.
but then the idea of a land invasion, he came back and he said, look, this is completely different. And this is what would be involved. It's a full blown war and it's similar to the Gulf War. If you want to win, and if you want to win, you're talking about, well, let me tell you what it took in the Gulf War. It took what's called the Seventh Corps. The Seventh Corps was an armored and infantry mechanized force that was based in Germany for the specific purpose of defeating a massive Soviet attack into Europe to take
Mhm.
France and the Low Countries and all of that. And that was a leftover from the Cold War. And the Cold War had just ended in '89, so they were free to move that out. And instead of moving it home, which is what the plan was, they moved it to Kuwait. And so all of a sudden they have this huge armored force that was probably 300,000 men and their tanks and everything else, because Saddam Hussein had an army of about 1 million and he had thousands of tanks. So it was a big fight. But uh, in Venezuela, they don't have a lot of armor, but they have a lot of anti-armor equipment, and they have a
Mhm.
lot of very well-trained professional soldiers, 120,000 of them. So that is a very
It's
difficult
a formidable
group to
force.
deal with. And then on top of that, they have 1 million not volunteers but militia, and they can blow up roads and do all sorts of terrible things to an invading force. So it becomes exponentially more difficult, and therefore the force to go in there, if you really want to go in, it was going to be quite large and very expensive to do. Now,
Admiral Alvin Halsey walks away a bit of a hero, but also without a career left. You know, this is something he's worked for all his life to be in this position he had now possessed. He leaves at the end of the year, and presumably they will find somebody to replace him. Maybe somebody who's willing to follow these orders, or not. Do you think that that's not even that they won't find someone qualified to do that?
actually, of course, they could find somebody qualified to do it. That's not the issue. The issue is, will anybody put his career on the line and actually volunteer to go and be the commander of that rather outrageous command? And the answer to that is no. I think that he would have a very hard time finding somebody who's willing to take that command. He'd have to be ordered to do it. And then I think you're getting into the position of saying, well, if you're ordering me to do it, then where's the congressional authority to do it? And at that point, you've got a confrontation. If he refuses to get a congressional authorization, then the military may say, sorry, well, we won't do it because it's a violation of the Constitution. The Constitution says the war power is vested in Congress. You don't have the war power, Mr. President. The Congress has. You have operational control, but you have to have a war declared first. So we won't do it because it's an illegal, unconstitutional order. I think that they would say that right off the top. And the interesting thing is this: he left. No replacement was immediately designated. They didn't have anybody to replace him. He's leaving early
Right.
December. He's leaving within 45 days. Where's the new guy, right?
Yeah.
And this is a big, huge command, a big read in to whoever's taking it over. It takes a lot of time, effort, and energy for people to get reorganized with a new commander. So that's a big process. And the second interesting thing is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Crane, um, who is the principal advisor to the president on military affairs, has not said a word about this. He's not defending the idea of an invasion. He's not saying anything, which indicates that he's totally against it. Otherwise, he would have said something to support the president. He would have said, "Yes, I've advised him to do it for the following reasons, and this is the we're going to have this kind of a plan, and et cetera, et cetera." He hasn't said a word, which means he's not cooperating with the idea of invading Venezuela. That would leave him, Trump is sitting there in the proverbial isolated booth. Yeah, you can give all the orders you want, but nobody's paying any attention to you.
Now,
And
there's a signal as well here to the rest of the military brass, right? They're seeing the president asking them or one of them to do something illegal. And so that must be rankling everybody in the military brass that they've lost one of their own because he stood up for the rule of law.
yes,
So what happens inside the military brass, which is a very formidable group of people who are responsible for protecting America and the American Constitution, when they see the president is asking for them to take illegal action?
Well, you know, I thought that was pretty evident at the meeting in Quantico what they thought of the Trump administration. They basically didn't say a word. They didn't applaud, and they had facial expressions that interested total contempt of him. I pictured some of the shots of the attendees there, this general officers, and I've never seen such grimaces among a group of people like that listening to a president of the United States. Usually they're very jovial and happy. No, they were uh, very distressed, put it that way. So we haven't had this kind of a problem since 1861 for the Buchanan administration and General Scott, which I've written about, and with General Grant and President Andrew Johnson. In both situations, the Army won and the president lost. Bottom
I
line.
want to get to the 1867 one soon, but before we get there, one question quickly about the ICE. This military spending bias. I'm leading to this point where you've got the military is not doing anything illegal right now. They have yet not acquiesced in these illegal activities, which includes being domestically deployed, which is one of the requests the president sort of made of them, which turns everyone's attention to what else does the president have in his arsenal, and one of those things is ICE, which is now spending $71 million on guided missile warheads and a whole bunch of military ordinances that you don't expect an immigration agency to have. That is worrying some people. Can you talk a little bit about what this unregulated military force that is a domestic army, a paramilitary force almost, what are they going to be doing?
Well, I don't know what crazy ideas Trump has or Hegseth has, because the National Guard is part of the Pentagon. It is part of the military, and it's a very important part. Now, they are state forces until they're federalized. So if they're federalized, they come under the command of what's called Northern Command and a four-star general. And then all of the orders from Trump and Hegseth must go through the four-star combatant commander for the Northern Command to deploy any forces within the United States.
But
And
ICE
so
isn't
you,
part of that. ICE is its own immigration agency.
no, well, I'll deal with ICE in a second,
Yeah.
but let me
Okay.
just deal
Yeah.
with the National Guard.
Sure.
So sending the Texas Guard into Illinois and having the Illinois Guard and the Red State Guard and the Blue State Guard working together to do what? And they haven't done anything. They're basically in their barracks, and they are in combined barracks in south of Chicago, and they haven't done anything yet. And if it's to guard federal buildings, to prevent federal officers from being mobbed or whatever, there's no problem doing that. But if they're actually going to be policing forces and trying to round up migrants and that thing, that will be an illegal order, and they will refuse to do it for that reason. It was illegal. They won't do it. And the Pentagon and the National Combatant Commander will say no, just like Holsey said to Venezuela. They'll say no. So you're going to be fired? Fine. Go fire them. Find somebody else to fill the job. And then you can't find anybody that will do it because they're not going to do illegal things.
Can you get to
So
a situation where you've got, let's say, the Oregon National Guard is responsible and listening to the orders of the Oregon State Command, and then you've got the Texas National Guard showing up in Oregon, following the Texas or the military command. I mean, is there a scenario where you
no,
see
no,
those two coming to?
yeah,
Does that
no,
happen?
they're all under the same
Okay.
command.
Okay.
It's all under the same command. They're not, once they're federalized, they're functioning under the Pentagon.
Okay.
It's easier for me to, so that doesn't ever happen. That
But if
won't happen.
the Oregon National Guard hasn't been federalized, but the Texans have been federalized, could those two be at odds with each other?
No, because the Pentagon will step in and
They'll still
prevent
do it.
that.
Right. Okay.
They're not going to, that's a blue on blue
Right.
attack. That will never happen.
Got it.
Uh, and the Army has, 250 years of history here. They follow orders, but they are a very tight knit group. It's a huge, very intense, loyal organization, and they work with each other every single day. It's like a finely tuned Swiss watch,
Mm.
and people start messing with that watch, and they'll get arrested.
Right.
They'll just get arrested. Now, back to ICE. That's an important question. And this is something I've been worried about ever since I saw Trump coming back for a second term, that he would use ICE instead of his kind of motorcycle gangs that he used before to attack the Capitol in 2021, Proud Boys and so forth. So he's moving into organized militia, and that's what Hitler did. I think somebody read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. And if you follow that book, which I have right here, it's a cookbook for how to take over a government. And the first thing you do is you have your own armed militia, which in Germany's case were several million veterans of the First World War. And so they were well trained, and then they got dressed up in uniforms and had training, and they had lots of weapons and everything. They were a formidable force in Hitler's ability to take over Germany. That's not what we have here. By the way, the army, the professional army in Germany at the time was very small. It was about only 100,000 men. So it was outnumbered, although they probably could have handled themselves okay because they were very well organized, but it wasn't the same problem. Anyway, in this case, this militia group that he's forming up is untrained. They're out of shape. And when I say untrained, it takes at least a year to become familiar with your weapons and become familiar with the ability to hit something with them. They're very complicated. Even a rifle these days is a very complicated piece of equipment. And it takes months of repetitive use of the weapons and taking them apart and cleaning them and putting them back together again in the darkness and so forth in order to be able to use them in combat. You don't fight during the daytime. You fight all during the day, and that's nighttime too, and in rain, snow, whatever. So they got to be able to get familiar with their weapons. Well, ICE isn't familiar with anything. I mean, they may have complicated pieces of equipment. They may have missile systems. They may have this, that, and the next thing, but they don't necessarily know how to use it. That's number one. Number two, they're out of shape, as you can just see by looking at them.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
not prime infantrymen. And if they ever came up with a prime infantryman properly trained, they would be wiped out immediately. I mean, they just it wouldn't be much of a conflict. Now, what's he thinking of? I don't have any idea what Trump is thinking by, and I asked, but remember, he has never had military experience at all. He went to a military school in high school, and that's it. He has no idea what he's doing, and neither does Hegseth, and neither does Stephen Miller, who is the one who's behind ICE and organizing ICE. So it's Stephen Miller in the role of Heinrich Himmler, if you know who he is. He was the SS genius who put together the SS Corps, and so they're very strange. I mean, if he arms ICE and he wants to use ICE to try to block, for example, the Congress, the new Congress that's elected in 26 from taking office in January 3rd of 2027, he could surround the Capitol with ICE and prevent them from coming in and being sworn in. Or he could try to track them down to whatever they're going to be sworn in and arrest them all and send them home, or do all sorts of things with this ICE crowd that would be running around arresting congressmen. All right, what would happen in that case? And I wrote a couple of seminars on that, and I believe that the new Congress, the newly elected Congress, could appeal to the military, and they could appeal both to the Pentagon, but also to the state governors in the immediate vicinity who are in command of their National Guard units, and could order them to protect the Congress. Now, this is a newly elected Congress, so they will have great respect because they just got a mandate from the people. The military will pay attention to the votes. You know, they're not They're not ignorant Prussians who are just following the Kaiser's orders. These are Americans. They understand what it means to be a voter and and you believe in elections and you honor the results of elections. And that's not what Trump is all about, but it's what the military is all about. So I think the military would protect the Congress. The immediate problem would be if they kind of took over D.C. The ICE put a whole bunch of people in D.C. and they were well armed. Then they would have to bring in National Guard units. Probably prefer to use National Guard units than regular troops, and this would be the regular Army people would control their National Guard units. And Pennsylvania has a National Guard of 15,000 men. I looked it up because you were interested in it, and that's a full division with an armored brigade, a striker brigade, which is basically an armored car unit that races down highways, and then a standard infantry brigade, mobile infantry brigade. It's 15,000 trained troops and fully equipped with what they call an equipment package that will blow anybody away.
What if what if
They wouldn't
if
have a
a
sense.
what if a blue state was really resistant to everything that Trump is going to do and starts putting up every barrier possible towards Trump's intentions to deploy National Guard, and even if he's legally allowed to do it, they just keep resisting. And what if he still wants to go in there with his ice his goons and his missiles and his grenades, and he says, attack Oregon. Go ahead, ICE guys, attack Oregon. They're enemies of the state. Is that feasible? Is that something that could actually happen?
No, it couldn't happen at all. I'll tell you why. He'd be arrested for treason, flat out. I mean, it's unconstitutional. Look, if the Constitution doesn't mean anything to Mr. Trump, then why should it mean anything to anybody else? The Constitution doesn't exist. And the only power he has is based on the Constitution because he was elected under the Constitution as president. So if he's ripped it up, then he's ripped up his own job. That's what I would advise the president. Legally, from the legal concept, he is basically resigned from the presidency once he tears up the Constitution and begins to act in an unconstitutional manner. He is very vulnerable to being arrested for treason. And President Buchanan in 1861 was very close to being arrested for treason by General Scott. So it isn't exactly, it's never happened before. It came close. And that's why I don't think it would happen again. And if it did happen, he'd be arrested and he'd be put under house arrest in some nice mansion and on some fort somewhere. And he'd be turned over to the courts and to the Congress. What do we do with him? And Vance would probably take over he'd take over the job because Trump's incapacitated because he's been
Or he's
arrested.
implicated in the same thing too, you'd imagine. Take
No,
take
no, no, no,
no.
no, no. That's the clever thing here. No, we don't want to incapacitate Vance. We want Vance to take over. Why do we want Vance to take over? Because we're going to follow the Constitution. And the Constitution says he succeeds the president. The president is incapacitated. He becomes president. The minute he's incapacitated, automatically he's president. If he's
Okay.
been shot and dead, he's president. You keep Vance in to honor the Constitution. Vance will, if Trump, this has happened to Trump, do you think Vance is going to go back to Trump policies? Hell no, he's not going to do that.
I don't know. It's hard to tell, but I agree with you. On that regard, he may not be exactly Trumpist like, but he certainly could institute his own things. But I want to go back to 1865, if you will. Take us back there. Lincoln is assassinated. Andrew Johnson becomes president. 4 million slaves have just been freed. What makes Johnson clash with the Republican Congress over Reconstruction?
That's a fascinating question. I've followed it for years, and you can you read hundreds of books about it, and it still is a fascinating subject. And the reason it is that think of it this way, from a macro point of view, you have 12 million people in the South, of which 4 million are slaves. One third of the population are slaves, and they're on plantations Basically, they're free serfs, is what they are. They're attached to those those land plantations, and so all of a sudden they're no longer slaves. They're free. They can move anywhere they want, do anything. And then they may not be citizens yet, but they're free. They're emancipated. This is what Johnson walks into. Lincoln hadn't had time to come up with a Reconstruction plan before he was shot. He was shot about a month after taking office in his second term. So Johnson is sitting there as president. Now, he was not a Union Republican. He was a Democratic Union man. And that meant that he, in fact, he was a former slave owner.
Which puts him on the
He
right wing of the spectrum as we know it today.
Right.
Yeah, right.
He'd be on the far right, and he was a wartime governor of Tennessee. He had been a politician, a local politician, climbed the ladder and so forth. But he was for the Union and for slavery, and he opposed emancipation, and he even lobbied against the 13th Amendment with Tennessee senators and